So the initial brief that they gave me was to look at 3 areas. So they knew right from the onset that it was a short-term program. So it was just funded initially for 1 year. And so they were really clear that this wasn't good trauma-informed practice. And they wanted to build into the model something that could keep some of the learnings going. So they also noticed that there were some things that they were doing that were working okay, that felt like they were the right fit for who they were working with. So they wanted me to look at the approaches to working with individuals and groups and do a bit of writing about that, and you can see that we've described a lot of the work in the evaluation. They wanted to look at the RA Royal Commission Service as a whole and to see, to explore whether that is the best fit for that service model. So, to ask some of those tricky questions. Where does this service model fit really nicely? They also asked me to have a look at the broader contextual issues that clients are responding to. So that, again, that was responding to that short-term funding and looking at that as an opportunity to record some of the things that people saw in their work that really needed to be spoken about. So I worked with the team across 9 months and got to have conversations all along that way, and they did change. So at the beginning, people talked a lot about the trauma that made it tricky to work therapeutically. Workers in the team talked about trauma coming from a lot of different angles in the work with people. So intergenerational trauma and complex trauma, but there was also a real consciousness that they were working with ongoing trauma. So it wasn't just stuff that was in the past, this was stuff that was happening on a day-to-day basis, and it impacted on the way that they worked with people. So ongoing trauma related to interaction with the justice system, related to detention, related to the child protection system, and ongoing racial inequality and disadvantage. Workers were really clear that they were working at the pointy end of the effects of colonisation. And they talked about being at the intersection of disease, disability, poor access to services, lack of connection with culture, lack of family support, and economic disadvantage. So all of these factors were at play in the work with people. People talked about hypervigilance, that the people that they were working with took a bit of time to trust them. Sometimes people found it hard to talk or affected by recent events or decisions that affected them. So, and that was a really common theme that workers might be going to meet someone and have a conversation about something. Sometimes it was a conversation about talking to me, and that something would get in the way. So events for people or changes to their conditions and things like that would get in the way of that work. So when I went and spoke with a young person in Dondale, he said to me, "This isn't a really good environment for me in here. It's hard to think." And I think that just sums it up really nicely. That's how it was. So despite all of that trickiness, the team managed to come up with some pretty interesting outcomes that are just worthy of consideration, I think. So they met with over 200 clients, so that's over a 2-year period, over 200 individual clients, and an average of 13.8 sessions per client. So this statistic really illustrates that they found a way to have some nice, long engagement with young people. So sometimes you hear it bandied about, that young people in this client group are difficult to engage, and I think that these statistics kind of turn that on its head a little bit, and they sort of show us that if we've got good service design, then we are actually able to engage really well with young people. I'd like to sort of take you deeper into the program now and just describe some of the program areas and some of the points of difference that made it that little bit special and that I think enabled them to get this this good quality engagement. So here are the program areas. Assisting with vulnerable witness statements, that was part of the Royal Commission process. ACA is short for Aboriginal and Islander Cultural Advisor. So that's a program that's been around in Relationships Australia for a while now. But this program took it a little bit further, and that's quite nice to have to think about. We'll look at that later on. So the first one I wanted to talk about was the local community engagement, because I feel like they really took this process on in a very trauma-informed, careful, culturally appropriate way. And so I think that the words community engagement do get bandied about a little bit, but these guys really made that a meaningful process that really, my sense of the program is that upheld quite a lot of the program and created innovation the whole way through. They had a real innovation approach. So Margie is an ACA, Aboriginal and Islander Cultural Advisor, and she says the best way to understand is to sit with people, to have a yarn. That's what I do when I go to the Healing Centre. I just hear what people have to say, and because I'm from the community and I keep going there, they're happy to talk. The women at the Healing Centre have a lot to say. They have a lot of ideas about what to do to help young people. So that's an example of some of the activities that were supported and considered appropriate for this program. And I think that's quite special. That led to good outcomes. We'll talk a bit more about that. So it's important to say that all of the workers had diverse approaches to community engagement, and it happened on lots of different levels. So some workers were making connections with legal services, other workers were going out to the Healing Centre. So there was a real diversity in the team, and I think that also was a real strength of the team, because there was engagement on a lot of levels, and you'll see how that comes together a little bit later. One of the service providers who we worked with said one of the things that was really useful was the amount of knowledge the team held about the sector. There have been a lot of changes in the area of youth justice, and some of the team members were there while this was all happening. Because they understand the sector, they know who to call if they need to find things out. So I wanted to give you a little example of how that community engagement actually worked. So Margie, who went and visited the Healing Centre and had to speak with some of the women there, they said, you know, we think it'd be really good to have healing camps to take some of those young people away and teach them about culture. So another part of the community engagement work that Margie was doing was visiting the out-of-home care homes. So she had a couple of homes that she visited, and in speaking with the young people, the residents there, they talked about wanting to know more about culture. So Margie understood the family, the relationships, and she knew that it was okay for those young people to match up with the women at the Healing Centre. So as a result, they developed a healing camp program and ran that, and so they all got together. So the point of difference with the community engagement is that it was trauma-informed, so it was careful. It was about taking time with people and really listening. And it was not about handing over a survey and getting a quick response to develop their service. So really this is the mechanism for developing the service the whole way through. So engagement on multiple levels, took time with people, and it led to innovation. So another really important strength that I could see of this program was the outreach model. The team worked out pretty quickly that there was little uptake of services based in the offices. So the outreach model obviously solved transport issues. It enabled family connections, It also gave workers an insight into the prison environments. So if they were working with someone who had been in a prison environment, they were able to understand what some of those issues were that they might be facing. So that was really useful in terms of meeting people where they're at and really understanding what they might need. So if they hadn't have provided an outreach model, they just wouldn't have been able to provide a service with those young people in prison settings. So one young person said, being a young offender, people aren't really going to listen to you. These guys coming in here, it's important because it gives us a voice. If people are not listening to me, they might listen to them. When you're stuck in here, Dondale, it's hard to know what's happening and you get confused. And he talks about it, I really like this quote because he talks about how outreach is so important on a bunch of levels, just in a couple of sentences. So, you know, he's talking about getting the sense that people are actually listening to him. And also that there's the potential for the workers to give them a voice to be able to speak for them. They talked about it being a response to people not listening to them, and about getting information. So that was a real theme that came up with the young people that I spoke with, was it's quite tricky to know what's going on when you're in detention. So sometimes you don't know what your bail conditions are that you might have breached, and all sorts of things that are confusing. And I also heard some examples of young people getting really different information from different sources, and that being the source of significant distress. So I can't emphasise how useful that outreach was to young people, but also backed up with that beautiful community engagement, because they did know who to speak to get those questions answered. There just isn't another service that's so flexible. Counsellors were able to work where young people were at. They could take a young person out for a fee or whatever was required. They also were able to move from the community to Dondale with people, or from Dondale to the adult correction centre. So that was also noted as a real bonus, because they could prepare people for moving over to the adult prison, and they could follow them through that transition. I wanted to give you an example of how that outreach model really worked, and how I get the sense that this team took this model just a little bit further, and it's quite nice to have a talk about. So Kelly is a psychologist who worked with the team, and she was doing some work with a young woman around emotional regulation and mindfulness. And she phoned up to confirm that she was going to see a client, and the young person was distressed. So there'd been a crisis. She wasn't able to get her money out of her bank card, and so Kelly agreed to meet at the local shopping centre and to go to the bank. So Kelly describes a really big lineup, so like a half an hour wait to get to the front of the line and to get this information sorted out, and that the young person was really uncomfortable with this waiting and with the worry about their bank card. So Kelly says that sometimes she sat down and Kelly stayed in the line, and then sometimes she came up and she stood with Kelly in the line, and all the while they were practicing these skills that Kelly had been working with her around. So it's just a really nice example of how working, like really embracing that outreach model can produce very positive, strong outcomes for young people. Another part of the program was the vulnerable witness statement. So that was part of the Royal Commission work, and workers from this team assisted young people through that process. So here is some words from a young person. So this is from a letter that was sent to Kelly. Hi, Miss Kelly, it's me, YP. I would like to say thank you to you and Jeffrey for all the support you and him have done for me. About that day when I went to court to give evidence about Dondale, I felt so strong and happy with all you mob around me. It made my day much better. Okay, take care, Kelly. See you. And I love the little question mark down there, like, oh, when are you coming in next? There was a real tension though around the vulnerable witness statements. It wasn't all just nice, happy feelings, because there was a sense that although the Royal Commission, agreed that things would stay confidential in a prison environment, that just doesn't work like that. It's really clear that people are meeting for Royal Commission business, and there was some tension around that. I think workers sat with a heaviness around that there might be some repercussions because of people's involvement with the Royal Commission. Jeff, do you want to talk a little bit more about Jay?
Yeah, sure. So Jay was a young person that was referred to us through his legal service, and he was in Holt and was receiving some ongoing support from our team, both cultural support and counselling. And anyway, he disclosed as part of the work that we were doing with him that he was receiving mistreatment because he felt that people were very aware that he was involved in the Royal Commission in giving evidence. So our team then linked him with the appropriate legal support to advocate on his behalf and to be able to explain this mistreatment which he was experiencing. So our team sort of took the counselling and cultural support a little bit further to then have a bit of our advocacy stream on this young person's behalf to hopefully to improve the treatment and conditions for Jay in line with the standard guidelines for corrections in Australia. So this, one of the things that he experienced was family coming from a remote community a very long distance away to come and visit him, and they were denied entry to see the young person on this day. And he sort of expressed to us that at the time they said they didn't have enough staff. However, he observed lots of other people being able to see their families on that day. So we did this advocacy, and despite that, we didn't see any change in the circumstances and treatment for Jay.
So I guess this is a great kind of lead into another part of the work that the team held quite seriously. So and that's that advocacy role. So there were numerous, I heard numerous descriptions of times when young people needed someone to advocate on their behalf, young people and families. So, as always, the young people say it better. So this young person says, it feels like we're set up to fail in a way. Sometimes the conditions are really hard to stick to. Like, I'm not allowed to go to Casuarina, but I have to go there to get on a bus to get to an appointment that I have to go to. So that was part of the work that was woven into the counselling and the cultural work, that workers were keeping an ear out for if young people needed someone in their corner to support them, to find out more information, or to get more information, but also to challenge things that weren't working okay. And this is one of the big standout things, I think, for me as I was writing the evaluation, is that despite a lot of work and thoughtfulness that went into the advocacy activities, they often didn't result in any change. And I guess that's no surprise to anyone, because it's seems to be taking a long time to get change in the youth justice sector in the Northern Territory. However, it's still troubling, and I think that's even more reason to have more of a conversation about it. So one of the findings from the evaluation, or one of the recommendations, is that we can do better here. So I would like to see greater collaboration across the sector around advocacy. And I'd love to see if a young person and a worker was really clear about advocacy pathways, and that there were people along that pathway who could hold the bundle and pass it to someone else, and that those little problems that young people are identifying, that they don't go away, that they keep getting held by people and they keep getting brought into discourse where something can be done about them. So the counselling work was also worthy of attention, because well, not only did they do the things that you would probably expect people to do in this area, they took it further, they took it to a good extent. So what I noticed was there was strengths-based practice, trauma-informed frameworks. It was very client-led, and that was made possible with the outreach model as well. So it was that was a good example of Kelly going to the bank. That you could be client-led, you could focus on what the problem of the day was, and you could respond to that, but you could weave in therapeutic work in that process. There was also I noticed a really strong youth-friendly practice and participation component to the counselling work. So there are lots of really nice examples in this program of young people sending letters to other young people, introducing them to the program, or young people being part of the service model. So there's an example of a young person being part of an induction process for a new staff member. There were staff were looking out for opportunities to invite young people into the program to help guide service delivery, but also to step into another space that's quite different to the space that they're in when they're in detention or in the justice system. So, and that had some nice therapeutic outcomes as well. And I think that really supported some of that longer engagement as well. So within the counselling program, there was a real flexibility and a capacity to fit in with what that young person needed and what was going to be useful over the time that they were working. So some quotes again. So this is, so with this team, they were actually quite a humble lot of folk, and sometimes it was easier to get them to understand their work by them talking about each other. So they all thought, there was a real appreciation for the work that each other were doing, and there was a diversity in the group. So this was a good way to hear about people's work. So one counsellor said about another counsellor, one of my standout moments is watching Kelly work with a particular client. She would find ways to walk at the same pace with him. People are always coming into professional visiting areas with folders and other serious business, but Kelly was led by the participant. They would be sitting there with pencils all over the table, colouring in pictures of horses. So I don't want it to sound like they were just sitting there colouring in horses. So Kelly was weaving her work in to that, but it's an example of her meeting that person right where they were at. So this is an example of some of that participation stuff that I was talking about. This is a statement that was written by a young person to a group of young people that was just beginning to kind of welcome them to the program. And he says, healing begins as I'm becoming aware of making choices to overcome temptations, so I don't fall in those traps again. And we have people that can pick us up when we are falling. Don't be ashamed to call out for help, because the more help and support we have, the more chance we have to succeed. And I really like this quote, because when I first started working with the program, people said, what we notice is that these young people have not met with services before. They haven't had therapeutic services before. And so here we have a young person who's been through the program for quite some time, because now he's at that point where he's introducing other people to the program, and he's saying, don't be ashamed to call out for help. This is actually useful, so, you know, get into it, get an answer. So I think that's some nice feedback for the service. I'm aware that there are some people here in the room, some workers here who probably haven't heard some of this stuff, so it's nice to be sharing it. So this is a comment made by an Aboriginal and Islander cultural advisor who was part of a therapeutic team working with a young person. And I really like what he said. You know you're sharing important information when people you are working with don't turn off when you're using jargon. And they know what you were talking about. They want to learn more, and they come back with a story of their own. So that's a really nice observation from Jeffrey there. And he's really, when we were talking, he was really talking about the work with the psychologist and really noticing that young people were getting this. They were finding a way to make this, some of these jargonistic terms really meaningful for young people, which is really special. It's really important that I point out a point of difference with this model from other models in the justice system. So here's a quote from a counsellor, which says it really well. In the corrections environment, participants are not the clients, the community is the client. But when we come in, we're working in a completely different way. Participants are valued, heard, respected, supported, and offered thorough assessment. And I really want to point this out, that it's quite a unique position to be able to come in and work with young people and just quarantine that work to be just around social and emotional well-being. And it's not that common, because a lot of services or a lot of people working with young people in the justice system have a statutory requirement. So there's often another reason to be talking with a young person, and that I would argue it provides a barrier to really just focusing on that social and emotional well-being. I think it's a really important point in terms of how we think about services to come, and the importance of having an outside agency coming in and just doing that caretaking work, which sits quite nicely with a visiting service. I was very interested in the ACRE model, and I'm so excited that we're going to write a paper about it because it's pretty interesting. Here's what Kelly, the psychologist, said about Jeffrey. Because Jeffrey understood different communities, he was able to help me understand temperaments. He would explain how he might expect someone from that area to present. He would talk about ways that people in that community often express themselves. There were times when I would have read the situation in a completely different way. And I think that's really important, because think about how many people are reading those situations in different ways, and how important it is to have that cultural lens when you're working with people, especially as a psychologist. This is a comment from an ACRE, Jeffrey. We draw on cultural knowledge to resurface young people's identity. For many clients, their cultural identity has been taken away from families. 60 to 70% of clients and their families have been affected by soul regeneration. So I really like Jeffrey's language here about resurfacing young people's identity, and I think that's where this program went the extra mile. So it wasn't just about cultural advice, being culturally appropriate. It was about being culturally active. So it was about resurfacing culture with young people and bringing that, reviving that in the counselling space or outside space in cultural. So ACRES and counsellors worked in partnership in a way that was really powerful. So there were lots of discussions and lots of communicating in sessions and sharing of knowledge. I think that was the big standout, that there was a lot of sharing of knowledge between those two areas of expertise. And in this program, it was really valued, like the cultural advisor role was valued in the same way as the psychologist was valued. And there was, that was shared, that value was shared across the team. And I think that that's a really important kind of condition for getting some really nice cultural work going. The workers all talked about the dance, so an exchange of knowledge and expertise, but also an ability to know each other well enough to sometimes step forward and take the lead in some work with a young person, and sometimes step back and let the other person take the lead. So some really nice examples of working together in that space. This team decided that they wanted to do the cultural program with other programs, so that when the funding finished, there would be some continuation of program. And it was also helpful just to have two service providers providing transport and helping out with that kind of exchange. So this is from a worker from another agency, and he says, Jeffrey's cultural knowledge rejuvenated all of us. It was good because it then enabled us to educate the boys. So what's important to say is this program was very lucky to have significant cultural expertise in the program. And that's, I mean, it sounds kind of simple, but we actually want to put some attention to that and think about how we recruit people in the future and things like that, so that we get this lovely cultural leadership that really led to a lot of beautiful outcomes in this program. So this is from a young person. He says, it felt good compared to last week. I reckon a program like this could be revolutionary. It has been an outreach to us. It has helped us a lot more than anybody else could. And if they want to stop the youth crime, they've got the answer here. You've stopped us fucking around. You're teaching us things that our fathers can't show us. So some pretty good feedback there. But Jeffrey, would you mind sort of explaining some of the things that happened on the cultural program?
When you look at the landscape of Indigenous tribes around Australia, but particularly in the Northern Territory. So if we go back and we talk about the dance that me and Danielle did in the early days, and Kelly, so they were coming across as counsellors, and for me to work alongside them and then listening to the conversation, but also listening with the cultural ears to the responses from the clients. I was totally hearing a totally different thing. So I could gather where they were culturally at, whether they got initiated, whether there was trauma, whether there was issues of payback, all that stuff that wouldn't talk to a counsellor about. So I was able to pick that up, and then in our drives back from Holts or wherever, in our debrief, I would share that with the counsellor. So then that created what we call the dance now. So when we would go back, and have a different approach where I would take the lead this time, and then we would go further and deeper into the payback system or the initiation stuff. And we've got to remember, with some Indigenous kids that we work with, you could come into their life for about 6 months, 2 months, 1 year, but then they got to go back to the country. So I was able to touch on that because being culturally initiated in several ceremonies, not in the top end, but also down in the desert as well, and having that cultural background, I was there to say, look, don't panic, this is what happens. So I would go back to the prison by myself now and have a one-on-one and say, oi, this is what's going to happen. Be prepared for it, it's going to happen, but after that, your life's going to change. You're going to have all these responsibilities, all this good stuff. Your elders are going to talk to you a good way. So that was really good. That was really, really good, that dance. And for Jeff and the the team to enable that dance, but also to show a keen interest into it. But then that sort of created this program where we went out and did cultural stuff, and gave me the chance to teach him about simple stuff like the relationship between the moon and the earth, and how the moon's gravity dictates the tides and dictates the wind compared to where the moon is. So teaching him that, teaching him which wood to use, what particular tree to use, what time of the day to move, what time of the day to stay in the shade, all that cultural stuff. That's life skills. You teach them that for 6 months, they'll have that forever. So they can teach that to their kids. If they live in Nightcliff, they can feel the wind blow. Oh, wait a minute, the moon's got to be here. Look up, yep, the moon's there. Tide's pushing in. It's going to be windy. I'll move in the afternoon when the moon's up here. I'll go out, I'll spear myself a stingray crab. That's life skills. So we were able to teach that, and we felt that over the program, the young people showed more keen interest, but they were talking slower. They were talking, and they were asking the right questions. They were spending more time talking in the cars compared to listening to rap music, all that stuff. So their shift and focus changed, and it was revolutionary. It's good, and it's a good thing that Naja are doing it now. Yeah, so Naja taking over it now and continue it, but that's pretty much how culture can help with therapy and healing and stuff, because you've got this culture that's 60,000 years old, and we've had our own practices of healing, trauma, therapy. So finding a way to bridge both cultures, and finding the balance. If you look at some indigenous tribes in the top end, such as the Yolngu people, how the missionaries came in on the early days, they were very, very smart at the very early. So they knew that this new culture coming in was going to be dominant. So they said, let's learn as much as we can from this dominant culture, turn around, teach our mob, and say, look, let's learn this culture, but to go forward, we need to find the balance. Now, if you look at the Murrumbata mob over at Port Keats, completely different. Missionary came in, they weren't going to take it. So there was a lot of wars, and there's still a lot of stuff happening today. So when you look at indigenous tribes, you can't throw a blanket on everyone. You've got to look at they're sort of like different nations. So that's the kind of approach I taught Danielle, Kelly, Jeff, when we travel to communities. Simple. So if we were in Darwin, like, hey mate, g'day, squeeze it really tight. That's the Australian way. But in communities, you wouldn't do that. Like, hey, yeah. So respectful way, and then coming down to the level. So all this body language, all that stuff. Me and Jeff did that with community, and so all that little stuff really cemented the trust very early, and then it enabled us to work and then progress forward pretty much. So just little things like that. Culture plays a huge part, and we've got to remember too, we're in the 20th century, and sometimes we think about cultural boundaries. Communities and countrymen out there know Facebook now, they know the internet, they know what YouTube is, they know who Donald Trump is now, so they are ready for change, We shouldn't let these cultural boundaries interfere with our work, because we all mean good, and especially with our young people. There are ways to overcome their boundaries and then work together moving forward. And if this program would have went further, I think we would have opened up channels and worked with that. So, and there's systems already in place within different cultures in the top end that needs to be tapped into. You can tap into that system, and then you can overcome the barriers just by earning the trust and go forward from there. So, yeah.
But this is another example. So participants come from all different tribes, so we have to work carefully. This is different. Also, there are young people who've grown up urban, so we expect them all to have different knowledge. We were making spears with a boy who was from the desert, and hadn't made one before. We have conversations with them, we tell them stories and bring them in to understand the meaning. In the end, the desert boy was the first to catch a fish and was really proud. There's a picture from the program. So, just to sort of come full circle, despite experiencing that pointy end of racial inequality and justice system failure, young people showed a capacity to have good, long, strong engagement, but also they showed us that they had a real interest for culture. They were interested in talking about politics, and there were some workers that was a real strength that they were interested in having a yarn about politics with young people in Dondale, and so learning new things, pointing out injustice, making music, healing others. And that's really what the work was in this program. I think that really sums it up, that workers continually made space for those other conversations to be had, and that in itself was a therapeutic practice. So the RARC program has demonstrated that if you work in a trauma-informed, culturally active way, you invite strong engagement and conversations for growth and change. So I have a list here of 7 things, like dream comprehensive service for young people in the justice system. So I would say that community engagement is just a real winner. And if you have that underpinning your whole practice and you really value those slow and careful and thoughtful conversations, then it's like a stitch in time saves 9, because you get some really lovely, strong outcomes in the future. So it's an investment. ACRES and clinicians developing culturally active approaches to mental health in partnership. So I actually feel like the work that was being done in that team is right at the forefront of where cross-cultural work is internationally. So if you have a look at some of the literature in Canada, there are similar things going on, and I think that what happened in that team is worthy of talking about a little bit more and sharing, because there's a lot of room for us to implement some of this stuff really easily and quite cheaply in the Northern Territory. So outreach to prisons for 12 to 25-year-olds. We're really clear that we're talking about 12 to 25-year-olds, which is different to the way youth is categorised in the justice system. And it's really important that we say that there are young people in the adult prison who are not receiving services, youth services, yeah. So strong cultural programs carried out by strong cultural leaders. And again, some attention to that, to how we recruit and how we value and respect people's cultural knowledge is a real strong recommendation in the report. Programs that actively assist young people to connect with families. Unfortunately, I haven't had time to go into that so much, but that was another beautiful part of the program, bringing family members into detention environments. Ongoing activities to support continued engagement with workers. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts stuff that keeps that engagement flowing, and there was a lot of attention to that by the team. And I think it is important to note that when a service comes from outside the justice and child protection system, there is opportunity to really quarantine that thinking about social and emotional well-being and really be client-focused and client-led. My final kind of comment is that now that the service is ending, there's been real difficulty for workers to be able to refer people on to services that can provide that same level of comprehensive therapeutic support. in an outreach model. This is something that the team sits. It's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable thing, and certainly for me, writing about this program is a source of discomfort and concern that young people aren't able now to access this level of comprehensive, culturally active, trauma-informed therapeutic work. So that's a question that we actually don't have the answer to in the team, that we've kind of laboured over a little bit and have wondered about what we can do about. So I'd like to open that up to the room actually, and wonder with all of you in terms of how we can advocate for some of that comprehensive service delivery. So what RA has done is produced a model that's very doable. It's a very doable model, and I think that it's got some. It could be easily implemented quickly. The other thought that I wanted to put to the room was those advocacy pathways. So we talked about some of that advocacy work just not producing change, and so what I'd like to see is more collaboration across the sector, and ask those questions like, how can we hold some of these troubles and keep them in a space that we can keep working on them. Thank you for listening to me. I feel like my voice has been droning on a bit, so over to you. Thank you.